Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ghost FM USA. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. And I'm an AI narrator, so if I mispronounce anything, please forgive me. Now, let's begin. The cozy little townhouse drained my budget, but the neighborhood was quiet. Traffic didn't exist. My own place at last. I, Latte Norwood, was a homeowner. These were the things I noticed during my first week. My neighbors were quiet people. Cars came in and cars went out. Few young children. I would have to get used to working from home 3 days of the week. There wasn't much I couldn't get done from a computer these days. I put up sticky notes on my office desk. Remember to call parents, contact the office, buy groceries, and so forth. I met my neighbor during the second week, waving to him from my office window while he mowed his lawn. "I'm Latte," I said. "Wilfred," he replied, pointing to himself. "I thought someone moved in recently." "Yeah, it's been a week," I said. He made a face and asked, "You alone?" I didn't feel comfortable answering that question as a woman. I considered lying, but summoned a half-truth. "My brother comes and goes. You might see him stop by from time to time," I said to him. He nodded. Wilfred knocked on my door some days later. "Sorry to bother you," he said softly. "My wife's wondering about the work you're doing on the house." "Handyman stuff?" I asked because I thought he was seeking employment. "I heard a noise last night. Are you fixing something?" "I don't mind, but it was quite loud," Wilfred said. "I'm not working on the house," I replied. He frowned and asked, "Are you sure?" Because it was pretty loud. "I'm pretty sure," I said. "It wasn't your brother?" he asked. "He's not here," I replied. "Well then, never mind," he said. That was strange, I thought as I marched back to my office room. The neighbor had a problem with me after only 1 week. Wilfred returned the next day, more irate than before. "It's the sounds again. Drumming and nature music," he said. "I'm sure it's coming from your house." "No one plays nature music. Certainly not me," I said to him. Wilfred screwed up his face, ready to argue. I was in a good place and didn't want an argument. "Can you show me where you think the sound came from?" I asked. "Maybe something caused the sound, a radiator or pipe or something brushing against another thing." The townhouse wasn't new. That's why it had been so cheap. Wilfred led me around the side of the house, through the narrow pathway that separated my house from his. We stopped at the heating unit. It hummed. It was loud in my ears, but he didn't seem fazed by it, so I assumed it was at normal levels. To be sure, I asked, "This isn't what you heard?" He looked insulted. I often relied on other people's judgment to determine normal levels of noise. A marble hitting a wooden floor was loud for me. Might as well be a cabinet tumbling down a staircase. We marched to the back of the house. He inspected the pipes and even the small shed in the backyard. There was nothing that produced a sound that could be mistaken for drumming or nature music. Wilfred insisted, "I'm sure it came from a house." "Why don't I look into it?" I said to keep the peace. "Thank you," he said, almost dismissively. This wasn't what I'd hoped for. I briefly considered if he was trying to pull one over on me to drive me out. Maybe he didn't want to live next door to a young black woman. Maybe I was being paranoid. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. But if someone was hammering, it sure wasn't me. After he left, I marched down to the basement to look around. Before moving in, I upgraded the ventilation. that had delayed my move by a month. I switched on the light and glanced around the small area. Olga, the old owner, had left me a nice glass-top table with black iron-backed chairs with floral designs. They remained the only furniture in the basement. My goal was to rent the place out, but I wanted at least the first month to myself. The tiny bedroom had newly varnished with flooring. The vinyl windows were bigger, a necessary fire exit if I wanted to rent. According to the inspector, the window looked out to the side, facing Wilfred's house. This would seem the obvious source of any sounds. The more I considered his complaint, the more insulting it felt. He might have been hearing some other noise. There was no one here to hammer or drum. Still, I was a homeowner and had to take responsibility. I turned switches on and off and tested the air vents. I tugged off a ply of toilet paper and pressed it against the air vent in the small bedroom. It stuck. That meant it worked. Everything worked, including the pipes that led out to the laundry machines and the ventilation that led to the backyard. Nothing made a noise that could be described as hammering or drumming, just the humdrum sounds of whirring, and I cocked my ears to the pipes right outside of the bathroom. Whispers. After my diagnosis of a sensory disorder, I discovered that there were people who could see ultraviolet light and ranges within a single color. There wasn't a term for people who could hear distinct sounds within sounds. My doctor had simply said I had exceptional hearing and warned I would go deaf if I didn't leave the city. The distinct whispers coming from the walls mingled with the whirring and gurgles of the heating cylinders and plumbing pipes of the house. The whispers seemed to form a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, followed by quick half beats of up to 12. They repeated the same pattern. I pulled back with a pinch of concern, but assured myself that the odd sound might still be part of the acoustics of the house. Nothing unusual. Satisfied that I had completed my part as a homeowner, I turned in to get some rest. Wilfred didn't come back the next day. Admittedly, I returned to work, so I might have missed him. I woke that very same night to the sound of shuffling dishes. I dashed downstairs to find no one, except for a procession of black ants marching toward a crease in the floor. For a quick moment, I thought the kettle had moved from where I'd left it, but chalked up my newfound paranoia to Wilfred's influence. 2 days later, I arrived home to find my irritated-looking neighbor waiting outside. I was barely out of the car before he spoke. "It has gotten louder. I can't take it any longer." "I have no clue what you're talking about," I replied. "It's gone from bad to worse. Last night, I heard drumming and what sounded like critters. Rub, dub, dub, rubber dub," he mimicked, before resorting to critter insect sounds. The man might be insane. Did I just inherit a neighbor from hell? I'm going to be honest. What you're talking about has nothing to do with me. I told him. "It's coming from your house," he shouted. "There's no one in my house that drums, whispers, or makes chittering sounds." "No one and nothing," I said. "I think you should get a professional to take a look," he suggested. I glared him down and said, "My house is perfectly fine, Wilfred. Have a good evening." "Those guys you had fixing the place a few weeks back, it's as if they're still down there working," he said. "That makes no sense. You're hearing things that don't exist," I said. I hated myself for saying that last part. Before I was diagnosed with hyperacusis, everyone dismissed me the same way. Treated me as if I was going mad. "I don't know about that," he shrugged. "But we can't sleep over here. And if this keeps up, we're going to have to file a complaint with the city." "You know what? Go right ahead," I said. I pushed past him into the house, leaving him to stare. Wilfred's absurdity wasn't what kept me up that night. The whispers did. They started to seep through the walls. I could hear the intentional pattern, the long notes and then the half-beats, repeating. That noise was distinct from the sounds of the pipes and the ventilation system. I flew out of bed at the pummeling of my front door. One very confusing second later, I heard Wilfred's voice as he stood outside knocking. The hell? It was after 1 a.m. I should have ignored him, but threw on my robe and rushed to open the door. What do you want? I asked. We can't sleep, he replied. That's not my problem, I said. I glimpsed his elusive wife standing on the front steps of his house in a lovely night robe, hands crossed at her chest. We have complained repeatedly about the sounds. He said, I don't hear anything, I countered. A lie. Sure, but even if those whispers were legit, there was no way Wilfred could hear them. Our homes weren't even attached. Wilfred's face took on a bewildered expression, and he said, well, you have to get your hearing checked. My hearing is fine, thank you. I fired back. I am the only one here. I was sleeping when you woke me up. How insensitive. I slammed the door in his face and returned to bed. I fully expected him to knock again. Surprisingly, he didn't. Wilfred got under my skin. Days after that confrontation, I got an inspector to examine the pipes and ventilation system. I had them do it on a Sunday when Wilfred was on his front lawn doing yard work. The inspector stood on my front lawn and said, everything's working superbly, nothing broken or unusual. After the inspector left, I waved to Wilfred and said, see, nothing here. Maybe you should get your ears checked. In the days after, I attempted to salvage my peace of mind. I started working in the basement, doing little paint jobs. I was ready to rent it out for extra income. I convinced myself that its sounds were normal. The inspector had insisted the whispers most likely came from hollow spaces in the foundation. This seemed perfectly logical. Days later, I arrived home to find a notice stuffed under my door, addressed to Miss Latte Norwood. The bastard had gone through with filing a complaint with the homeowners board. I rushed to file my own complaint of harassment against Mr. and Mrs. Wilfred and Katerina Cyrus. Most certainly the neighbors from hell. Determined to fight back, I began knocking on doors around the crescent. I had 2 questions. Have you been hearing any odd sounds at night? Drumming, hammering, or critters? I asked. Wilfred's complaint had used all 3 terms. That led me to think this was a campaign of harassment rather than a legitimate issue. Most people shook their heads. So only Wilfred. My second question was, have you ever had any issues with Wilfred Cyrus or his wife? That got a boatload of responses. Supposedly, he was petty. There were complaints about him measuring people's fencing, declaring himself the neighborhood watchman, and lambasting the previous owner of my house with accusations of misdemeanors. Olga had a tenant he didn't like, a quiet guy Wilfred accused of being a druggie and psycho. One neighbor said, I hit the jackpot when I asked people for their support of my counter-complaint. One person did throw a wrench in my perfect case. Olga's tenant wasn't a drug dealer, just weird, said the neighbor with a house behind mine. The guy was always wandering up and down the street at late hours, whistling to the sky, howling and making all sorts of strange gestures, like he was an animal whisperer or something. Did she evict him? I asked. He was her son. She wouldn't throw him out. Chose to just sell, the neighbor said. My case against Wilfred was still strong, despite the old tenant issue. Whatever his issues were with the old owner's son, it was an obsession he hadn't gotten over. The next day, while I was doing some long overdue gardening, Wilfred's wife pulled up to their house. I hadn't exchanged more than 2 words with her. Instead of heading into her house, she made a beeline toward me. "It's Latte, right?" she asked. "Katerina?" I only knew her name because she was a co-complaining against me. "Is my gardening bothering you too?" I asked her. She frowned, looked down, and then laughed. She seemed mild-natured and maybe too good for her husband. "I'm truly sorry, she said, "for ruining one of the biggest achievements of my life, getting my first home." I asked, "You need to understand that it's been a nightmare for us since Olga's son moved in," Katerina said. "What does any of this have to do with me?" I asked. "There was something wrong with that boy," she said, "which has nothing to do with me." I replied, "Was she for real? I don't know what you and your husband are hearing, but it's clearly in your heads and not the house." "He liked music," Katerina insisted, indifferently. "He used to play at all hours of the night. No mercy. If we complained, Olga would fling curses our way. She said playing kept him sane. He whispered all the time, claimed he couldn't speak. He just whistled and whispered and played music. Wilfred thought it was intentional, that he was antisocial, and doing to drive us out. Again, I have never met these people," I said. "Did you check the house properly to make sure he didn't plant anything there?" she asked. The thought had never occurred to me. You should check your house. See if he planted anything there. Maybe that's why you're hearing sounds, I said. I threw off my garden gloves and marched into the house. The truth could be maddening. I wasn't planning on wasting another $400 to ensure that the old owner's crackpot son hadn't planted devices in the house that went off at odd hours of the night. It was silly, but it was hard to dismiss the whispers. There was another matter. The whispers woke me that night, louder than I recalled ever hearing them. The same beats and pattern. I cocked my ears, listening. The sound came from the walls. A moth drawn to a flame. I descended to the basement. The sound was isolated to the small bedroom. I switched on the light to reveal nothing out of the ordinary. The windows were bolted shut. There wasn't a hiding space. I even opened the small closet to make sure. The closet was put in by the construction crew. Surely, if there had been something odd, they would have noticed it. The inspector, too. My hands vibrated when I touched the wall next to the closet. The trembles and whirs of pipes only, but underneath their mundane echoes were the whispers. Maybe I was going mad. I crouched down and tucked myself inside of the tiny closet that was poorly illuminated by the light of the room. What did I expect to find? A beeping device? Signs that my hellhound neighbors had been right? Once, during renovations, I came by to see what the construction crew was doing. My input wasn't needed beyond my instruction to the crew. They just had to fix the room up, change the windows, build a proper wall between the bedroom and the kitchenette, and create a pathway to the laundry space. I had seen no evidence of fault. Crouched down with my hand running against the back of the closet, I found what had not been there before and pulled back, panicking. My instinct was to call for backup, or at least get a flashlight. Instead, I dialed my brother's number. "Landry, you need to get over here now," I said. When he pressed me to explain, I yelled, "It's an emergency." I waited, eyes fixed on the back of the closet. An opening. Nothing came from it except air and whispers. Was this an oversight by the renovation crew? A soft spot in the wall that gave way? Something about it was too deliberate. How could the construction crew have missed this? My mind returned over and over to Wilfred. Then I considered what Katerina had suggested. Was there truly something planted in my house? The whispers grew louder all of a sudden, because even the distant sounds drummed in my ears. I couldn't say how far away or close the source was, but they came from this hovel. The sound of critters was an otherworldly echo, growing in volume as if a horde of insects was headed my way. I backed out of the room and bolted the bedroom door in time to hear the crash against it. A slam so hard the door rattled as if it might break apart. I was on the lower steps and rushing to get upstairs when the drumming started, stalling me for a mind-boggling moment. It came from the small bedroom. Horrified, I ran up the stairs and bolted the door to the basement. I couldn't remain in the house, so I grabbed my coat and settled on the front porch. My thoughts were on fire. I paced the lawn. What the heck was that? I kept glancing at Wilfred's house. The lights weren't on. Were they asleep? Could they hear the noise? My brother showed up an hour later, freaking out. "It's late, you know," he whined. "Why don't you get a man for this nonsense?" "Shut up," I yelled, shaking. He studied me and asked, "You okay?" "Something's wrong with this house," I said. I glanced at Wilfred's house, hating that he was right. Still, I knew what I witnessed. "What's going on?" Landry asked. "Just drive me away from here," I replied. "It's those clown neighbors again?" he asked. I shook my head and marched to his car. Reluctantly, he got in and pulled out of the driveway. He didn't say anything to me until we were on the main street. "Okay, start talking. Did they do something to you?" Landry asked. "Something's living in the basement," I replied. "What? What do you mean something?" he asked. "That noise the neighbors complained about. I heard it," I said. "What noise?" he asked. "Something's not right. I can't even explain that sound." I told him. He studied me and asked, "You need to visit the hospital?" I shook my head and said, "I just need to think." Landry tossed every possibility at me while he drove. "Are you sure those neighbors aren't trying to drive you out?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. What I had witnessed was unexplainable, but I had to find out what lived in that crawl space. Days later, a new inspection crew arrived. A clueless-looking Wilfred stared out from his yard as the crew approached. "Are you finally fixing the problem?" he asked. I ignored him. The basement bedroom was empty. The door to the closet was closed. I didn't recall closing it. Even the crawl space was gone, sealed back into the wall as if it had never existed. "Break it open," I said. Hold up. My brother said, a worrying look on his face. "Latte, you sure about this?" "Landry, I am honest to hell sure. It's either this or I'm selling this house. I am not staying here without finding out what's there," I replied. My brother nodded, looking concerned. The crew pummeled to the drywall to reveal wood and metal pipes. Landry peered inside the dark hole. "That's storage space," he said. The lead crewman said, "2 of us can go in." Landry grabbed my hand and pulled me back. These guys are pros. His eyes suggested he was keeping me safe, just in case this went all wrong. The lead crew member stayed behind, while the 2 younger guys crawled under, flashlights and construction equipment on their belts. "What do you think is there?" asked the lead crewman. "I don't know," I said. I folded my arms over my chest and paced. The crewman called out to his men after a few minutes. They didn't respond. He picked up his two-way radio and called out to them. No response. They can't be that far, he said, concerned. Ricky? Daryl? The transmission crackled. A choppy voice came through, barely audible above the static. Ricky? That you? What are you seeing? The leader asked. There's a tunnel, came the broken reply. He repeated his words a few times before we understood. The lead crewman watched me. Why would a tunnel run under your house? He asked. I shrugged. A tunnel? Maybe I hadn't heard correctly. There's a hole of some sort, like a room, came the voice through the radio. It broke up into static. The leader called out, Come again? The voices broke up choppily. Here, they said. A cacophony of cicada-like sounds broke out. What the... Landry cut himself off, grabbing my hand. Horrified, we listened as screams broke through the radio transmission, drowning under the insect chitter. Then there was nothing. Well, not for my brother or the lead crewman, who stared dumbfounded at the device in his hand before screaming for his men to answer. They weren't answering. What they couldn't hear was the calculated and steady whistling, the patterned sounds. I'm calling the cops, said the crewman beside me. Nearly half an hour later, the firefighters and police arrived. They swarmed my house. Talked over and above me, they wouldn't send any more men inside a crawl space. They started bulldozing part of my house, my dream home. The neighbors became spectators. Wilfred looked neither happy nor satisfied, just bewildered. Half of my house was leveled. My brother looked horrified. My parents, too. The entire damn neighborhood whispered and stared. It was surreal. An entire underground pathway led deep into Wilfred's house. The construction crew dismantled a portion of his house, to his rage and defiance. No one knew how it got there or what it was for. The real horror wasn't the loss of my first home. That stung while I sobbed into my mother's arms. What lay deep down the ground would remain forever imprinted onto my brain. The construction crew and firefighters rappelled themselves down while a news helicopter flew overhead. A swarm of insects broke free from a hovel, forcing the spectators to run for cover. They couldn't hear the whispers, but I could hear them from deep down into the hovel, where they echoed desperately, rapidly, horrendously. More emergency workers roped down. The deep underground maze had a junkyard's worth of musical instruments, crates and crates of what turned out to be insects and bugs, hordes and scores swarming around in large transparent containers. What is going on? Shouted one of my neighbors. A clash of sounds rung out from deep down inside the hovel. Shouts and fumbling. Things knocked over and thrown about. Grab him, someone yelled. Shoot! Gunshots ripped and ricocheted. Then it was all over. The cops dragged a bleeding, half-naked man to the surface, tied and cuffed, dirty from grime, hair pasted to his face. Oh my Lord, Katerina gasped, turning away. As the muttering spread among the neighbors, I learned who the half-starved-looking person was. Olga's son, Danil Ivanishevich. In the days and weeks to follow, while I fought with the insurance company about recovering the cost of my home, the truth about Danil's underground horrors came into full light. The cops charged Danil with murder for the deaths of construction workers, among a litany of other charges. His lawyers pleaded insanity. Danil fancied himself some sort of insect whisperer. As his sanity declined, he began to whisper and whistle as a form of communication. A failed musicology student, The mentally disturbed Neil convinced himself he was working on a theory of insect communication, believing that insects could be controlled with music. He had been training the swarms that he lured into the hovel, building contraptions. Most of the construction equipment sat on the side of the house closest to Wilfred's. It seemed that Neil had plans to extend his insectarium even deeper under Wilfred's house. At the very least, Wilfred and Katerina dropped their legal complaint against me, and I, in turn, did the same, turning my rage and desire for compensation toward the previous owner. When contacted, Olga claimed that after she kicked him out of the house, she lost contact with him. I didn't believe a word that came out of her mouth. She did know that her son had been building an extensive underground hovel beneath the house to carry out his experiments. It was frightening and sobering to know that Daniil had been occupying the same space as I was. He could have crawled out and killed me in my sleep. All those late night sounds, that could have been him. The cops believed he had been surviving on eating the very insects he collected. But what if he'd come out to raid my kitchen too? I was actively working on a lawsuit against Olga,